The disgrace arrived before the dawn, carried not by trumpets or accusation, but by silence so complete it felt like a verdict. When the carriage door closed behind her, the sound marked an ending no law had prepared her for, and she understood that in England a woman could be undone without a word ever spoken aloud. She had been duchess once, if only by ink and witness, a title worn as carefully as borrowed lace. Now she departed as she had entered the marriage, without procession, without protest, with her chin held steady and her voice unspent. Those who watched pretended not to see, for discretion was the last courtesy afforded to women who had failed to be useful. The Duke of Ashcombe did not watch her go. He remained within the estate he governed like a principality, already turning his mind toward ledgers and obligations, persuaded that endings, when clean, were merciful. He believed the contract fulfilled its purpose, and that affection, left uninvited, would not trouble them either. It was a belief born of upbringing, of men raised to consider restraint a virtue and tenderness a liability. Their marriage had been conceived in rooms where politics lingered in the air like dust. Ashcombe required an heir. Parliament required reassurance. His family required silence. She required survival. Her lineage was respectable but thin, her fortune diminished by misfortune rather than folly, and her character praised in the careful tones reserved for women without power. She accepted the terms with a composure that impressed the solicitors and misled the Duke. He mistook her calm for indifference, never considering that dignity can resemble distance when pride is all one owns. Within the walls of Ashcombe, life settled into a rhythm of courtesy. They dined together beneath portraits of ancestors who had married for conquest and coin, not choice. Conversation was measured, their glances brief. Yet there were moments the Duke dismissed as habit rather than feeling, her hand lingering near his sleeve when a draught chilled the room, the way she learned his preferences without asking, the quiet order she brought to a household long accustomed to command rather than care. She, meanwhile, learned the cost of silence. Each day required a delicate balance between obedience and self-respect, between gratitude and invisibility. She understood the unspoken rule that a contract wife must not hope, for hope would make her dangerous. Still, she found herself listening for his footsteps, noting the rare warmth in his voice when duty loosened its grip. She did not ask for more. She believed asking was the quickest way to lose everything. When the agreed term drew to its close, the Duke approached the matter as he did all others, directly, with politeness and relief. He thanked her for her cooperation. He ensured the settlement was generous. He assured her reputation would remain intact. He did not ask how she felt, because feelings were not enumerated in the document that had bound them. She received his words as she had received the marriage itself, with a small inclination of her head and no appeal for reconsideration. The night before her departure, she walked the corridors once more, memorizing their echoes. She paused by the window where she had often stood alone, hands folded, breathing through a private discomfort she had not named even to herself. There in the stillness, the truth settled with a weight that stole her breath. The life growing within her made no sound, yet it changed everything. She understood immediately what it would demand of her: courage without witness, sacrifice without praise. She did not tell him. In a country that forgave men their errors and punished women for circumstances beyond their control, she chose silence as an act of protection, not pride. To reveal the child would bind him publicly, stain his careful order, invite scrutiny from a society eager for scandal. She believed love, if it existed at all, was proven best by restraint. So she left. The estate absorbed her absence with remarkable speed. Servants resumed their routines. Invitations were declined and then accepted again. In London, whispers bloomed and withered in the same breath. Some said the Duke had corrected a mistake. Others suggested she had failed him in ways too indelicate to name. No one spoke of her with malice. They spoke of her as one speaks of furniture removed from a room, briefly noticed, quickly forgotten. Weeks passed. The Duke experienced what he assumed was satisfaction. The house was quieter. His responsibilities felt lighter. Yet an unease threaded itself through his days, subtle as a draft through a closed door. He found himself noticing absences rather than presences, a chair unoccupied, a question unasked, a stillness that no longer felt orderly but hollow. In that interval, memory behaved treacherously. He recalled small kindnesses with an intensity that surprised him, reinterpreting them through a lens newly sharpened by loss. He remembered the way she listened without interruption, the patience with which she bore his silences, the steadiness she offered when his temper frayed under pressure. These recollections did not announce themselves as love. They arrived disguised as inconvenience, as distraction, as an irritation he could not name. He dismissed them as fatigue, unaware that the mind, denied truth, invents lesser reasons to explain the ache it refuses to admit. Pride insisted such discomfort was temporary, manageable, beneath the Duke. It was only later, much later, that the first fracture appeared. A letter arrived, sealed with a hand he recognized, its contents restrained yet grave. It spoke of her seclusion, of a physician summoned, of a condition impossible to misinterpret. The words were careful, respectful, devastating. The Duke read them once, then again, until the truth displaced every certainty he had built. In the quiet that followed, duty shifted its shape, and for the first time he understood that by letting her go, he had not concluded a chapter, but begun a reckoning he could no longer outrun. The truth did not enter gently. It struck with the finality of a bell tolling for a life already altered. The Duke of Ashcombe read the letter in one unbroken breath, and in that moment the world he trusted to be orderly revealed itself as careless and cruel, shaped by his own hand more than he could bear to admit. Honor had governed him since boyhood, drilled into him with precision and consequence, yet now it rose as accusation rather than comfort. A child existed, his child, conceived under lawful vows and abandoned through lawful indifference. The distinction between what was permitted and what was right collapsed, leaving him with a shame he could not outsource to circumstance. For the first time, he felt the weight of power not as authority, but as failure. He did not rage. Anger would have been easier, a simpler emotion, but what came instead was a slow, corrosive dread. He thought of her composure, her careful obedience, the quiet way she had departed without asking anything further of him. What he had taken for acceptance revealed itself now as resolve, and the realization unsettled him more deeply than accusation ever could. She had protected him at her own expense, and the knowledge left him exposed. The household noticed the change before it was spoken. The Duke moved through his days with altered restraint, no longer brisk, no longer assured. Decisions once made swiftly now stalled beneath reflection. He dismissed advisers early, finding their counsel inadequate to the reckoning unfolding within him. Responsibility had expanded beyond estate and title, pressing into the private territory he had long guarded against intrusion. Whispers reached him soon after, carried through channels too discreet to be accidental. Her seclusion was noted. Her refusal of visitors was interpreted according to convenience. Some expressed concern, others curiosity. The Duke understood the danger immediately. A woman without protection was an easy subject for speculation, and speculation, once fed, became judgment. He had released her into a society eager to conclude she deserved whatever followed. A single object brought the matter from abstraction into grief. Among his papers, misfiled and forgotten, he discovered a note she had written months earlier, never delivered, its tone restrained and careful. It spoke of gratitude, of respect, of a hope she claimed no right to voice. There was no mention of the child. There was no plea. The absence of demand cut more sharply than any reproach. He understood then that her silence had not been emptiness, but generosity. The Duke resolved to find her, not as a ruler correcting an error, but as a man compelled by obligation deeper than reputation. He justified the decision first in terms of lineage, then legality, then propriety, until at last he acknowledged what underlay them all. He could no longer endure the knowledge of his absence from her fate. It was a reckoning not with society, but with himself. Their reunion was not softened by relief. When he stood before her, she greeted him with the same courtesy she had always shown, as though nothing irrevocable lay between them. Her restraint was unyielding, her voice steady, her manner unaltered by his presence. In that composure, he saw not distance, but the cost of survival borne without complaint. It unsettled him more than anger would have done. He spoke first, carefully, as one accustomed to command yet newly conscious of its limits. He offered apology without explanation, acknowledging fault without defense. The words felt insufficient, but they were all he possessed that did not insult her intelligence. She listened without interruption, her expression composed. Though her hands betrayed a tension she quickly mastered. Silence followed, weighted with everything they had never spoken. When she confirmed the truth, she did so plainly, without accusation or appeal. The child existed. She intended no claim. Her choice to remain silent had been deliberate, guided by an understanding of the world she inhabited. She would not risk his standing, nor burden him with a responsibility he had not sought. Her dignity remained intact because she had chosen it so, even at great cost. The Duke felt the words as judgment. He understood then that the injury he had inflicted was not solely abandonment, but the assumption that her worth was conditional. In seeking to avoid scandal, she had accepted solitude. In preserving his honor, she had forfeited her own protection. The imbalance shamed him more than any public censure could have done. He asked what she required, expecting at last a demand, but she shook her head. Her future, she said, was settled according to necessity. She asked only that he not trouble himself further. The request was not cold, it was merciful. She offered him release from the consequence he had already incurred, and the generosity of it left him momentarily speechless. It was then he understood the full gravity of his mistake. Ending the marriage had not concluded a transaction. It had severed a trust. Repair would require more than correction. It would demand exposure, humility, and a willingness to challenge the very structures that had enabled his indifference. As he left her presence, resolved yet uncertain, the knowledge settled with quiet force that reclaiming her would mean surrendering the safety he had always prized, and the future now hinged on whether he dared to choose responsibility over fear. The reckoning arrived not with spectacle, but with consequence, and it fell upon the Duke of Ashcombe like a sentence long deferred. Once resolved, there was no retreat into silence, no private correction to a public wrong. What he intended now would be seen, measured, and judged by the very world that had taught him caution. He began where duty demanded, before family whose approval had once guided his restraint. They listened as he spoke of obligation, of law, of lineage, and of error, but it was the steadiness of his voice that unsettled them most. This was not a man seeking permission. It was a man prepared to forfeit comfort for rectitude. Objections followed, framed as concern, yet beneath them lay fear of scandal, of precedent, of a woman who had stepped beyond her appointed place, simply by enduring. He answered each resistance with clarity, conceding nothing essential. The child would be acknowledged. The marriage would be restored in fact as well as name. His wife's position would be reclaimed not quietly, but openly, so no whisper could wound her again. In doing so, he invited scrutiny from every quarter, including those whose favor he had once guarded carefully. The cost was considerable. He accepted it without ceremony. Word traveled swiftly, acquiring embellishment as it went. Some called his resolve reckless, others admirable. Many waited for him to falter, convinced that pride would reassert itself. Instead, he proceeded with deliberation, assembling witnesses, counsel, and authority. Every step forward narrowed the distance between intention and irrevocable action, and with each narrowing came a peculiar relief. For the first time, his sense of honor aligned with his conscience. When he returned to her, it was not as supplicant nor master, but as equal before the truth he had chosen to face. He spoke plainly, laying before her not persuasion but commitment. He told her what he intended to do, and why retreat was no longer possible. His words did not plead for affection. They claimed responsibility, and in that claim offered something rarer than apology, restoration without condition. She listened as she always had, with composure that concealed depth rather than absence. Yet something had shifted. The certainty she had built around endurance wavered, challenged by the scale of his resolve. To accept him now would mean trusting a world that had already failed her once. It would mean risking hope, the most dangerous indulgence of all. Silence followed, not as refusal, but as measure. At last she spoke, not of love, but of consequence. She asked what would become of her should public opinion turn cruel again, should his courage diminish under pressure. He answered without flourish, acknowledging uncertainty without retreat. He would stand, he said, because he had learned the cost of not doing so. The promise was not romantic, it was resolute. That, more than tenderness, persuaded her to consider what she had sworn never to desire again. The formal acknowledgment was conducted with solemnity rather than celebration. Before witnesses who understood the weight of precedent, the Duke named her his wife, without qualification or defense. He named the child his heir, without apology. In that moment, titles resumed their meaning, not as privilege, but as shield. The room received the declaration in measured silence, then acceptance born not of warmth, but inevitability. Society responded as societies do, with hesitation followed by adaptation. What could not be undone was absorbed, explained, normalized. Those who had whispered grew circumspect. Those who had judged found new subjects. The scandal many had anticipated failed to ignite, smothered by the Duke's unwavering posture and the absence of spectacle. Dignity, long underestimated, proved its quiet authority. Within the restored household, changes unfolded gradually. Familiar rooms felt altered by her return, as though memory itself had been corrected. She resumed her place without triumph, aware that security earned through visibility was fragile. Yet the tension that once defined her days loosened its grip. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not governed solely by caution. The Duke, too, changed in ways that surprised even him. He discovered attentiveness where command had once sufficed, patience where certainty had reigned. Responsibility, once abstract, acquired human dimension. He did not mistake this transformation for absolution. The past remained irreparable. What mattered was the future shaped deliberately rather than by omission. Their bond was not sudden, nor effortless. It unfolded through mutual regard, built upon shared endurance rather than illusion. Words were chosen carefully, gestures restrained, yet meaning accumulated in the spaces between. Love, when it came, was neither dramatic nor loud. It was persistent, earned through acts repeated until trust no longer felt like risk. As the months progressed, anticipation replaced anxiety, and the household prepared for an arrival that symbolized more than lineage. The child represented consequence accepted, duty fulfilled, and a quiet defiance of a system that had once favored convenience over compassion. Each day carried both promise and uncertainty, for society's tolerance was conditional, and memory unforgiving. On the evening before the birth, the Duke stood alone, aware that despite all he had done, the final reckoning lay beyond his control. Power, once absolute in his mind, now revealed its limits. He understood then that love did not erase vulnerability, it required it. When he returned to her side, his resolve was unchanged, but his certainty had softened into something more enduring. The future, still unwritten, waited with measured patience, and as he took her hand, aware of the life soon to enter theirs, he understood that the gravest mistake of his past had become the foundation of a fate he would spend the rest of his life proving worthy of.